Welcome to another edition of the ACE podcast. I'm Pete Paphides, and this week I'm delighted to welcome a gentleman who, over the course of the past 35 odd years, has established himself as one of the great British actors of his generation. He memorably landed on our screens when he was still in his teens, playing the part of Billy Risley in Willie Russell's One Summer. But since then, he's amassed an incredible body of work, both on the small screen with State of Play, The Knock, Our Mutual Friend, Blackpool, Red Riding, South Riding, The Driver, and on the big screen with Basic Instinct 2, The Reaper, Nowhere Boy, and The Ones Below. He also inspired a string of sad YouTube montage tributes when his character, the Governor, met his end on the hugely successful American zombie series, The Walking Dead. He's a familiar face on our stages too, having appeared in Macbeth, Much Ado About Nothing, and Hangmen, which I was lucky enough to go and see him in. And with Something for the Weekend, Sweet Revenge, Passerby, and Don't Worry About Me, he's shown himself to be an equally safe pair of hands in writing and producing and directorial roles. We're almost certainly going to touch on some of those achievements, but it's primarily in his capacity as a huge fan of music. We're going to be getting to know David Morrissey, and here he is.
Hello, pleasure to be here.
We're delighted to have you here. We're going to be talking about, I've got lots of, I'm curious about the kind of the way music has interwoven into your life, because we've spoken about music before on occasion.
Yeah.
And I know even just before we came in today, you were saying how you, for a while, you had the rights to Julian Cope's.
I did head on to, which I just adore. I mean, you know, he was a big part of my growing up, and the Teardrop Explodes was a massive part of my, you know, late teens, really.
You grew up in Liverpool.
I grew up in Liverpool, and I was barman at a venue called the Everyman Bistro, which was the Everyman Theatre, and it had this drinking den underneath it. And, you know, all the faces used to come in there at one point, and Julian would come in and stuff. And then they'd play at various venues around Liverpool, and there would be a big scene, you know. And then I read Head On sort of when it came out, and obviously knew all the venues. I didn't know all the stories, but, you know, certain streets that he was talking about. He went to CF Mott, which was this sort of crap college, I think, sort of just on the outskirts of Liverpool and stuff. And he talks all about that. So there was a lot of recognition with that as well. And then when I got my own production company, that was the first thing I bought. Sadly, we never got it made. It was for lots of many reasons, but I'd still think it would be a fantastic movie.
Just to put us in the frame, tell me, like, how old you would have been when you were sort of at this point in your life, and where you would have been at sort of in your life generally.
Yeah. So I grew up first of all, I was born in Kensington, but then we moved to Knotty Ash when I was about 9. And it was, you know, people always laugh about Knotty Ash because it's where Ken Dodd came from, and it sort of, you always had this whole act about where, you know, the Diddy men and stuff. But it was one of those big new industrial estates. It was one of those inner city estates that, you know, now we know so well. So where I grew up in Kensington was like old Coronation Street houses, and they were condemning them. They were knocking the whole place down. So families from there were taken to either Skelmersdale or, you know, Kirby, or in my case it was to this estate in Knotty Ash. And I grew up there, and it was quite conventional. But then my father died when I was about 15, and just before that he'd been ill it seemed like all my life, although I think it sort of really kicked in sort of when I was about 8 or 9. That's when he had to stop work and stuff. And just before then, about a year before he died, I discovered acting properly. You know, I discovered that that's what I wanted to do. And where I went to find that out was a place called the Everyman Theatre, which was in Hope Street in Liverpool. And that was a very vibrant, sort of bohemian-like part of Liverpool. It was right by the Philharmonic, both the Philharmonic pub, which was a great music venue, but also the Philharmonic itself, the Philharmonic Hall, which was obviously where all our classical music was. It had, at the other end, it had, you know, Gambier Terrace, where John Lennon had lived, and the Crack pub where he drank and stuff like that. So it was a real rich territory. And music, live music, was massive at that point. And the Bunnymen were coming through, Teardrop Explodes were coming through, the Pale Fountains were playing, which was a personal favourite of mine. So there was lots of music around, and you know, we were steeped in it.
And when you heard all these new bands, did they were you into something else prior to that point? Did you have to sort of change to accommodate this new?
Yes, I was sort of radio airplay sort of stuff. I mean, the first record I ever bought was Steve Harley and Cockney Rebel, Come Up and See Me, Make Me Smile. That was my first purchase. And
sorry, can you where did you buy it?
Yeah, I bought it in Dale Street in Liverpool in a record shop there, and I went in and bought it, and it very quickly became #1. And I remember thinking, I've done that, you know, that's me. I've done it. And I just liked it. I remember liking the particularly the guitar solo in there as well. So that, you know, it's sort of conventional music, although as I've grown older, you know, one of the artists I really liked at that time was Rod Stewart and the Faces. I liked Rod Stewart, but I also liked the Faces, and I still like that. And that music for me and the Small Faces, it sort of started to grow then. That was the music I liked.
I think we all have our like safe place artists, don't we? Where like we just want to feel like mentally in a good place.
Yeah.
Is that one of the artists that does that for you?
Yeah, I think so. Although, again, you know, the music of I'm the youngest, so there's 4 kids in my family, and I'm the youngest by, you know, my eldest brother is 12 years older than me. So it seems odd, but songs like Paranoid by Black Sabbath are they're a bit of a warm bath for me as well, as far as the past is concerned. You know, Led Zeppelin, all the music he was listening to, a lot of Crosby, Stills and Nash, a lot of Joni Mitchell, you know, so they're the safer artists for me. My brother wasn't into Rod Stewart at all. That was something that was mine, but the safe, nostalgic artists would be that. And my sister's big album, which I loved, and when I held it I loved it, just to look at it, was Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, was Elton John. And it was a double album, although I think it only had 1 record in it. So you opened it up and it had all the lyrics, and it had beautiful colour illustrations, a bit sexy sometimes, you know, and stuff. And the lyrics of that, and recently I was actually playing Harmony, which I thought was such a great record. So those artists of that time are the nostalgic artists for me, the safe artists for me.
There's something very comforting about hearing a record coming out of your sibling's bedroom, I think, and having that sort of, because often if it's an older sibling, it's a record that maybe is just at the kind of outermost edge of your kind of understanding, or you have to kind of stretch out a bit mentally or emotionally to sort of appreciate that record. And
usually, in my case, and I'm sure this is true of most people, is there was an illicit nature to those albums because they didn't want me to touch them, you know, because, you know, I was a snotty-nosed kid, and putting the needle across the vinyl was always going to be a dangerous pursuit for me. So there was something illicit about going into their bedroom, usually when I'd got home from school but they weren't home yet, and playing it, the fear of being caught, you know. So I certainly have that around, you know, some of the Led Zeppelin stuff and my brother's albums, certainly around. Even now, you know, the album Blue I think of as a precious commodity when I see it, because it was his big album, and I didn't, you know, if I just knocked the turntable, that was it, you know. So those albums, and certainly, you know, true of Crosby, Stills and Nash, those albums still have a big illicit nature to me. Just even seeing the pictures on the covers.
Yeah.
And there's that great Stephen Stills album of his. It's his solo album, which has If You Can't Be With the One You Love, Love the One You're With. And he's in a snow-covered setting, and he's got this strange pink giraffe-like stuffed toy on the cover as well. And I must have scratched that album or something, because it really has an effect on me when I see the image.
Have you ever heard the Isley Brothers version of Love the One You're With?
No, I haven't.
I must play it to you.
Oh, yeah. Great.
They had a way with their covers. Fantastic. Yeah, I get that with the textured sleeve of Blue by Joni Mitchell. There's just something about that textured sleeve which kind of takes me to another place.
And my cousin was in a band. He was his name was Colin Frost, and he was in a band in Liverpool. First of all, they were called Eat at Joe's, and then they were called Circus, and then he joined up with Albie Donnelly, and they played with them, and they were supercharged, and they were massive in Germany, and they were a sort of jazz combo really. And Albie Donnelly was a great saxophonist in Liverpool, and Colin played with him. So I was on the peripheral of that as well. I used to go and see him. He is a great guitarist, so there was a real smell of the dressing room around that as well, that I wasn't just out front, I could get backstage a little bit.
And anyone at a certain age, anyone who's just playing a guitar is like a famous person to you, aren't they?
Yeah,
they have that. I remember a busker going into my parents' fish and chip shop and just started playing these songs, and I kind of ran back up to my bedroom and came back with an autograph book and just pushed it in his face, 'cause I thought,
anybody
just must be a famous person,
Yeah. And I think in Liverpool at that time it was, I don't know what it's like now, but I think that element of the live scene where pubs would have the stage and people would go in and they play, and there was lots of battle of the bands going on in various sort of, Liverpool University would have that, and so it felt like a very vibrant scene to be a part of. And I when I say I was a part of it, I am not musical, so for me I was able to observe it rather than participate.
Did you have any sort of tribal affiliations at this point? Because it was a more tribal time for music, wasn't it?
Yes, I mean, Ian Hart, who's his name growing, his real name is Ian Davis. He at some point, I don't know how this happened, but he ended up playing maracas for the Pale Fountains. I think he just looked great. He does look great. He had all the clobber really. He just looked the business, and looked like they did. They sort of had this thing going on which was slightly Haircut 100 took it. I remember when I first saw Haircut 100 on Top of the Pops thing, they've nicked the Pale Fountains look there. That's really, so it was slightly Aaron jumper with braces over the top, and
and peaked caps that pointed upwards.
There was that Russian sort of overcoat thing going off. It was all army surplus slightly, and Julian definitely got into that. But so Ian being in the Pale Fountains meant that they had I was really into them a lot. Pete Wiley was massive for me. I mean, he still is really. I think he was the guy around town I used to see a lot. Certainly where I worked, in the bar I worked in, I think his girlfriend's sister worked there, so he was in there a lot and was a big personality and always massively generous, with his personality. He was somebody who was, he was a great storyteller but also a great listener, and his music I just adored as well. And seeing him on Top of the Pops, seeing him doing Story of the Blues, it just knocked me out really. That somebody I'd served drinks to was suddenly on Top of the Pops. That was fantastic.
Well, it was. I mean, the myth. He was obviously part of this kind of mythical triumvirate.
That never happened. Yeah,
they met. Didn't they rehearse once? Or something?
Yeah.
So for people who don't know, Ian McCulloch and Julian Cope, allegedly, in this group, the Crucial Three. Yes,
and they were the Crucial Three. What was amazing about them was, even though nobody ever saw them live, or their influences separately, and their rivalry between the three of them was really interesting as well, and Bill Drummond and all that, so all that stuff in there.
They're very, very clearly defined personalities, weren't they? So if you ever were going to make that film of that time, it would be kind of a dream in a way, because there's Julian, who was kind of quite gauche and middle class in some ways,
and an outsider. He wasn't from Liverpool.
So his talent, I would imagine, would be something you would almost resent, because he was kind of uncool in some ways, and Ian McCulloch, who I would imagine no one thought was uncool.
No, he was absolutely the epitome of cool. And Pete was in there, who had a mixture of both really. But and the thing that really was the glue amongst them was the music. And of course, then the other thing you had is, in a football analogy, is you had this very big noise just down the M62. You had Manchester, and even then there was this sort of friendly, sometimes very unfriendly rivalry. But it acted as this catalyst on those two the musicians from both cities, I think.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. And there seems to be a kind of that kind of difference of attitude as well, which is very sort of, we were talking a little bit about it earlier on, maybe with a reference to the Pale Fountains and to Mick Head, who I know you're a fan of, but that slightly it was a more sort of self-deprecating approach.
Yes, I think so. I think we were talking before about that element of the real fear that was around at that time as far as those musicians was concerned. And I have to say, as far as actors were concerned as well, was this fear of the accusation of selling out. That, he's sold out. It was the worst thing you could say about anybody. I liked him, but he's sold out. And so that is both a good, positive thing because it keeps an eye on yourself, but it also can be a quite oppressive thing. That it can act on you in slightly a negative way as well. And with those three examples, I don't think it did. But there was other bands you felt that they were just locked in. They were locked into the coolness of it, rather than the actual kicking the walls down and just be who you want to be and do it. And it's all right wherever you go. Yeah. And sometimes, it's interesting when talking about Rod Stewart is there were certain friends or certain pockets of my life. At school, it was always fine to talk about Rod Stewart and the Faces. That was fine. But at the Everyman and in Hope Street, I would never say that I like Rod Stewart, because it was sort of seen as, your big tartan scarf and your sort of, and one reaches an age where you don't care anymore, and you can say, I love it, and it doesn't matter,
Of course,
but it really mattered then.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's that is that, like we said, that tribal sort of era. So you mentioned Wah and the Story of the Blues. So that was 83, which is obviously a very exciting year for you personally as well, wasn't it?
It was an amazing year for me. So I sort of left Liverpool. I'd gone. I wanted to be an actor, and I left school early. And they had these great things called Youth Opportunity Programs, YOP. And you were paid, it was a Thatcher invention you were paid by a company £23.50 a week, and that took you off the unemployment figures, although it was only just a little bit more than your benefit. And that meant that companies could use you in any way they wanted. They were supposed to give you an apprenticeship, but actually it could end up as you were just making the tea, or And I had gone in and said I wanted to be an actor, and the guy said okay. And there was one place in Wolverhampton that was a theatre company that employed YOP. So I went there and I worked there for 6 months. And whilst I was down there, Ian Hart, my best mate, he said to me, they're auditioning for something in Liverpool that I don't know what it is. It's a new Willie Russell thing, but come home. And I said, I don't want to come home. And at that time, Wolverhampton was like, an hour and a half away on the train, but it felt like I might as well be, in the United States or something. I said, I can't come home for that, And anyway, I did. I got on a train and I went up, and it was at the Adelphi Hotel. And it was like Miss World. So you went in and they gave you a number. And there were so many lads in there. It was like going to, a football match or something. The whole foyer was full of lads my age. And we all had numbers, and we would go into a room with the numbers, and somebody who I later found out was the casting director would say things like, okay, number 5, number 9, number 12 and number 14, you can stay, everybody else can go. And of course I was number 14 or whatever, so I was able to stay. And then the next time we went back and we had to read a couple of lines, and that went on for ages. It felt like ages. And eventually I got a part in this BBC drama, Channel 4 drama called One Summer, about 2 Scouse lads who ran away to Wales. And it was a big deal. It was, it felt, at the time it felt big, and it felt like, I got a job in a TV drama, and that felt great. And then it all went quiet, apart from the fact that they paid me, and they paid me really well. You know, I got quite a lot of money from it, or I felt like I got a lot of money from it. So I decided to go travelling. So I went to Africa, and I did quite a bit of travelling around there. And I was sitting in a hotel in Nairobi, and I was just having some tea or something on my own. And there was a couple in front of me, an old couple, very sort of colonial people, and he was reading the Times paper, and he was just reading it, and he turned over the paper to get to the other side, and there was a picture of me on the newspaper, and I had to go over to him and say, excuse me, can I borrow your paper? And I looked at it, and it was a review, a pre-review for One Summer that was coming out, and I thought, I've got to get home because it's on the telly. So I booked my flight. I got a flight. I'd been there for quite a few months, actually, so I was ready to come home. But I got my flight brought forward, and I got to Euston, and I was waiting for the Liverpool train, and people were looking at me, and I was slightly like... By this time, episode 1 had been on. And then I got on the train, and people were looking at me again. I was thinking, I don't know what's going on here. This is quite strange. I hadn't put the 2 and 2 together. And I got out of Euston and out at Lime Street, and I got in a cab to go to my mum's, and the cab driver went, I can't believe it. Yeah, Billy, you're in my cab, Billy. I'm gonna.
Oh my word!
And that was the first time. And then he asked me for my autograph and stuff like that, and I couldn't believe it. And I got to my house, and I knocked on the door, and my mum said, "Everyone's wrong. Everyone's been ringing," and and relatives I didn't even know I had were ringing and stuff like that. And that was the first time that sort of recognition, and the idea that it really made its mark really in Liverpool. And then from then on it was different. Things were different.
If you had to kind of answer with a percentage, how much % did you like that feeling?
It's a really good question, actually, because you're supposed to really enjoy it, and I think I did enjoy that initial recognition, but very quickly I grew to be very suspicious of it. So I would say 50% probably. But I was 18. I was in Liverpool city centre, which had been an anonymous place for me, and I really, I was in my tribe, my friends, but I was not Ian McCulloch, I wasn't Pete Wiley, or I was able to observe those people, and suddenly I was that face, and that didn't sit well with me. It was fine with girls, that was great, it was fine with, you could get girls out of it, and you could use that, and that was always a nice thing. But you also got their boyfriends being a bit miffed as well, and slightly sort of... I remember actually the first time One Summer came out, because it was repeated, and the first time it came out, I realised that girls fancied me because I'd been on the telly, and that was great. And their boyfriends hated me because their girlfriends liked me, and that wasn't so great. But something happened with the second time it came out, which was about a year later. It was the complete opposite happened. That lads approached me, and they had identified me, and they wanted to engage me in conversation, and they wanted to be my mate. And their girlfriends hated it. They hated the fact that their boyfriends were sort of saying, yeah, I'll be with you in a minute. Anyway, Dave, what was it like when... And that was really strange. And I think I preferred the former, with the boyfriends hating me, because I sort of slightly knew how to deal with that. But the girlfriends hating me, I was all over the place. I thought, no, I can't handle this. This is terrible. So it was just a very strange turn over the 2 seasons, really.
Blimey. Well, that's supposed to be the Holy Grail for the modern pop star these days, is to sort of to be someone who sort of the girls fancy, but the boys want to go for a drink with. Right. And that's kind of so Ed Sheeran's aced it. Right. Okay. And Robbie Williams, and I think that's, if you can get that right, then it's just the bullseye, Yeah. And then you have a kind of further layer out of people like Will Young, who sort of mostly have female appeal, but not so much male appeal, and it kind of goes further and further out, I think.
Well, for me, you know, the whole drama of One Summer was an escapist drama. It was about two lads who were in trouble with the law. They came from broken families, and all they had were each other. They were mates, and they had each other, and they escaped to Wales. It was where one of the boys had been happy on a school trip. He couldn't work out when he'd ever been happy, and he just said, I remember when I was happy. It was when I went on that school trip to Wales. And so he's trying to get back to his, you know, the dream of happiness. And it touched a nerve. I think it really did touch a nerve. And even now, when I go back to Liverpool, I went back not so long ago, and I was in a cab with my wife, and the guy who was driving me to my brother's house, and he turned around to me and said, Billy wouldn't recognise it now, would he? And my wife was like, what's he talking about? And it was One Summer.
And you knew straight away?
Yeah, I was right in there. I was like, no, that's why he ran away.
So what music would you have been listening to sort of around that? What bands were you sort of actively trying to seek out?
You know, right then, I mean, it was interesting for me because Ian was a big influence on me then. I think one of the big albums then, funny enough, was Springsteen's Nebraska, because it had come out. It was a very different Springsteen and much more, you know, just solo and sort of socially conscious, and it felt like it didn't have that big brass section, and that was something that I remember getting. But yeah, it would be, you know, it would be Echo and the Bunnymen. I mean, I think The Back of Love was a massive record for me. When we were in, when we were doing One Summer, there was a location we would go to. We filmed it in Leeds, funny enough, and Spencer and I, who played Icky, we went to this pub, and on the jukebox was Back of Love, and we played that all the time. So that was a big one for us. Teardrop Reward, of course, was just massive. Or even now I can see the video that went with that, you know, and Gary Dwyer on that snare drum just banging the out of it, and that sort of Jeep going around all over the place, and people playing the trumpet and stuff. So that was the big one for me as well. And so all those things, you know.
What about that second wave of artists, like people like Frankie Goes to Hollywood?
Yeah, I mean, Holly, I knew Holly a little bit. So yeah, that came out later. That's when I came to London. So I went to drama school then, and I came down here to RADA. And Frankie, that was really the time that they came out, and they were huge. And we'd seen them live, you know, as early on in their career, and they were wonderful. So for them to break through was quite amazing for all of us, really, and just so danceable. You know, it was that club scene thing. There was a place in Liverpool called the State, and it was a place that everybody would go to dance. And you know, the Two Tribes and all that was the big music that we would be dancing to.
So the State. It
was called the State, yeah. And
what did it look like?
It looked like some 1920s Great Gatsby-like room that you went in. There was a lot of chrome, a lot of gold chrome around, and I remember it's slightly green, whether there was plants in there or whatever, but there was a lot of green, a lot of tiles, a lot, massive dance floor, a lot of dry ice. I mean, a hell of a lot of dry ice. So it was a bit like, you know, Tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be. It was like walking through the dry ice onto the dance floor, and it was and loud and lots of lights and stuff. So
did you ever feel envious of people in bands?
Yes, terribly. Yeah, I did. I felt envious, and my cousin Colin, I was very envious of him. I was envious of his talent. You know, I was envious of that being in the spotlight in that way. I was also envious of the fact that, and I am still envious of this fact, that you are a conceptual artist, that you and your guitar in your bedroom can come up with brilliance.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to come to. Well, you know, the fact that obviously this is less true of you because, you know, you write and produce and direct, but for a lot of actors, a lot of actors I've known over the years do almost sort of fetishize that kind of role, that the sort of that kind of singer-songwriter thing, because
well,
you're controlling it.
Yeah, singer-songwriters are artists. My wife's a novelist. The fact that their time scale is their creative time scale is their own. I know they have all their own demons, of course they do, but their creative process is in their own fingertips. My creative process usually starts with the phone ringing and someone saying to me, oh, they're interested in you doing this job, or they're interested in you doing that job. So I am an interpretive artist. I am someone who needs to be employed, whereas songwriters and painters and writers, they are their own employer in a way. Of course they need to work and they need people to buy their work, but the creative gene, the thing that makes them go and tick, is within their own fingernails.
Well, yeah, and you sign a contract and sometimes you commit to a certain amount of series, and of course,
have no idea.
Well, yeah, and I mean the thing about you, which is kind of evident, I think, to people who have watched you over the years, is that you have this way of kind of getting underneath the skin of your characters, and so you're clear. I feel like with you, you're trying to exercise, and I guess all good actors are trying to do this. They're trying to exercise that control in as much as they can, but ultimately, if the thing that you've signed for changes beyond all recognition, then you're going to have to be quite philosophical about it.
You are, but also I know I'm in a position philosophically where I can sort of go, there'll be another job. This is just suck it up. Or usually I say that, but actually, mostly, I'm so thankful, grateful, and in love with my job. Even when I've been in jobs which I've not been the best in the world, and the writing has been pretty ropey or whatever, I do always start my day as much as possible by going, it's great here. I'm so glad to be here. And I've been in terrible situations and in horrible places, but I've always gone, you know what, it's such a privilege to be here. So I've started to do that certainly over the last 15 years. But for starting out, it is difficult because you're constantly, you can get yourself into that place with, you're only as good as your last job, and you can dry up and the work's going to dry up. And I still feel that as a motivational thing. I feel that a lot. I think lots of actors do. But I do now feel I will get a second chance. Yeah. But also, I enjoy it when I'm doing it. If I'm in something and it's not going well, I'll find something inside there that I can latch onto that's positive.
You're a big soul music fan, aren't you?
I do like soul music. I like Northern Soul.
Because you do that. I've noticed a lot on Twitter. You will often post a link and it's usually a soul tune, and you're always like, you got to listen to this.
Yeah, it is. And I when Twitter first started coming along, and I was on it, and I sort of posted a few things, and then I thought, how can I use this really? So what I did was I just post music, and I would listen to some tracks, and I would say, oh, I like that, and I'd share it, and then usually some positive comments would come back, obviously some negative ones as well, but I just like sharing, and it's opened up a dialogue with people. Do
you get people who will say, well, I don't know why you linked to that, that's not very good?
No, what I get is, yes, but don't you know the original of this was done by... So you get that thing that happens a lot. You think, this isn't even the best recording of this that they did. I think you'll find, I get that a lot.
Yeah.
So that's always fun. But mostly, I have to say, what I get is positive feedback, in the sense that people will say, oh, that was nice, have you heard this, or what about that?
Yeah.
Or so it's usually 99% of it is very positive, really.
If you we're here in Spiritland, and from the window to my right, I can see 2 record decks. If you had to magically kind of magic some records out of nowhere and do a quick soul set, set, what would you? There
was one recently which I got, and I'm trying, as I sat here now, I think I might have got it via your show actually, but it was Rita and the Tiaras.
Oh my word! My love is gone with the wind.
Love is gone with the wind, which is just fantastic, and I've been playing that a lot. And there's also a musical version of it, a sort of which is really interesting.
On the flip side.
On the flip side, it's just the music, which is great. So you can do your karaoke version to it on the thing.
Is that if I was a fly on the wall in the Morrissey house?
Yes, you would see me doing that, and you would probably see my kids throwing things at me at the same time.
Was it ever thus?
But and my wife got mad because I'm throwing down talc on the kitchen floor and sort of spinning around in my Birmingham bags. And also, Frank Wilson's "Do I Love You?" Indeed, I do. It's just that's the quintessential track to me.
What is it about that stuff that
it just is that sort of northern soul. I also love the story of northern soul in the sense that it was taken up and discovered by predominantly white northern teenagers, and this whole dance craze came out of it.
Were you just a bit too young to?
I was a bit too young for that, and I can't do. I've tried, but I can't. You were talking before about Hangmen, and there was one of the actors in that, Ryan, who that's all he did was he went out and did northern soul stuff. He'd come in, do the show, and then he'd go and find a club and he'd go dancing. And a part of our warm up was him doing sort of dance lessons with us. So doing the triangle dance and sort of shuffling around and stuff. And we all have a go, but God, I can't do it. But it didn't. All I did in the end was just wave my arms in the air. So, but I do love it. It's so great.
I remember when I saw you in The Driver, which is fantastic, by the way. I say fantastic. I couldn't get to the end of it because I was just too...
So upset.
I was too... it was bothering me so much what was going to happen to this fundamentally good man.
Yeah, the tension of what was going on. He was going totally down the toilet, really.
Yeah, okay. I need to talk to you about it because I didn't find out what happened at the end because I just couldn't bear it anymore.
Okay, I'm going to have to give you the DVD.
Okay, well, that's fine. Anyway... There's one scene I remember he's in bed and he's wearing a Manic Street Preachers t-shirt, and I was wondering if that's like your little touch or if that was just
you have to. I always try and do certain things like that, but of course the difficulty for any costume department is it has to be cleared in some way. So you will give them like in the thing I've just done, The Missing. I play an army guy who's sort of in the middle of Germany, and his whole army life he's been on a base in Germany, and I wanted him to wear a Metallica t-shirt, and we had real trouble sort of clearing that design, clearing the thing. So there's always the copyright issue, but with the Manics same thing. And so I had a list of things that I wanted, but that was the one. And I think it was important for me to show that this man had a life before this.
I love that,
this life where he was now. He was slightly stuck in a life. He was driving a cab. He was sort of washed up slightly, but he'd had this life, and his life was sort of music is always a great way, a shortcut of seeing.
Well, there's also another scene where there's kind of he puts on a record. Yeah. It only happens in
he puts on the Stone Roses. So what happens is
the Stone Roses?
Yeah, his mate comes round.
Yeah.
And he hasn't seen his mate for years, and it's his old school friend who's been in jail, played by Ian Hart, funny enough, who's my old school friend who hasn't been in jail. But and he comes around to his house, and his wife, my character's wife, is saying, "I want him out of here. He's trouble." Yeah. And he says, "Well, he's my friend. He's staying." And he goes through. He finds all these old records in the bottom of a drawer somewhere, and then puts them on, and one of them's Stone Roses. I think it was Waterfall or something. But it's like, oh, this is it, and it's just to do with that very powerful and quite dangerous thing of living in the past, of sort of the love of nostalgia. And I think we do it as individuals, that we can be trapped in that place. But also, I think, we can do it as a country as well. That desire to be back somewhere that's safer, and you forget about all the other stuff that was happening in your life at that time, which was a disaster. I mean, we talk about Liverpool of the late 70s, 80s. It was a wonderful time. But for me personally, it was a terrible time. I mean, there was so much turmoil, emotional turmoil and upset that I was charging through. Which I would never want to go back to. I would never want to be in that emotional upheaval ever again.
This is the bind we're in, I think. So we're kind of, as a country, in a way, we sort of, there's a great book actually written by Owen Hatherley called The Ministry of Nostalgia, which really talks about that sort of keep calm and carry on culture, which is just completely sort of airbrushed our kind of concept of what was happening in the past. We're kind of short for time, so I'm going to leap on to another aspect of the past. Obviously, it's illegal for me to interview you and not ask you about the Beatles. But that's not a we love the Beatles, don't we?
Oh, I can talk about them all day, don't worry about it.
Okay, well, that it just occurred to me that sort of as you were kind of growing up in the 70s and early 80s, that would have been, we try and forget often, don't we, what happened in the previous decade?
Yes.
And I'm wondering if that happened with regards to Liverpool and the Beatles.
It slightly did. I mean, it didn't. Amongst my own friends, not at all. I mean, we were always championing them. They were all, we had Ian and I often had no money at the end of the night, so we'd have to walk home, and we would walk home singing Beatles songs at the top of our voices. It was very much part of our world. But the city of Liverpool had forgotten them. The cavern had been bricked over. Eric's had opened and was on the other side, which was the new sort of wave coming through. And there was a couple of statues. There was a really sad Beatles shop. But the place was full of tourists. They would turn up and they would walk around, and the city took a while to catch on to this as an industry. I mean, now you have the heritage sites of the four Beatles homes that they grew up in. You have Strawberry Fields. You have the Beatles mystery tour. You have the Beatles hotel.
Yeah.
So the city has caught on to the pride of its past and the Beatles themselves. But for me, the really important thing for me as a child, thinking about what I wanted to do as an adult, thinking about maybe I wanted to be an actor, was walking the streets of Liverpool. And having read Shout and all those books, and the journeys that the Beatles made, Little and Town Hall, all that, they were real bricks and mortar places for me. I knew them. I'd been there. I'd walked down those streets, and knowing that the Beatles had walked down those streets, gone into those buildings, drank coffee in those coffee shops, was an encouragement to me that anything was possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
That, I would never dream that I had their talent, but I knew that the city wasn't, didn't close me in. I could do anything I wanted. I could stay in the city and do anything I wanted. But the idea of growth, culture, popular culture, taken seriously.
Absolutely.
And I've always been grateful to the fact that I grew up in a city that when I said to people of my generation, I want to be an actor, very, very few people laughed at me. Most people said, "Oh, great! How are you going to do that? What are you going to the Everyman? Have you doing?" They discussed popular culture in a very open and excited way, rather than a "don't get above your station" sort of way. Anything was possible.
Absolutely. Before we say goodbye, what's Beatles top 3 today?
Oh, that's him today. Well, I think, God, it's put me on the spot. I mean, I think Across the Universe is something I really wild.
Absolutely.
God, it was. I Need You, which is a Harrison track, which I really love.
I was going to say you can have, I mean that's not you can have solo tracks as well if you want to.
Okay, and I think solo tracks. Well, I would say that Maybe I'm Amazed, coming back to where we started. Maybe I'm Amazed, song by Rod Stewart and the Faces. Wow. Is a pretty fantastic combination. Yeah, I've just finished the Paul McCartney biography.
Many years from now? That one?
No, is it Norman Stone or gosh, who is it? I can't remember. It's the person who wrote Shout.
Philip Norman.
Philip Norman. Philip Norman. And it's really interesting getting that take on McCartney and some obviously amazing stuff that he did. So yeah, I mean, it's hard for a top 10. I mean, I think Revolver is the great album for me, But yeah, I mean, my top three would change hourly, and you know. But so it's really hard for me.
I sympathise. Sorry to put you on the spot.
But I think but Harrison's tracks would be in there a lot for me as well.
Yeah, there's just something about that sort of like lugubrious feel of a George Harrison song that I'm just rooting for in a profound way. Okay, we're coming to the end of our time. David Morrissey, thank you so much for
been a pleasure.
Telling me a little bit about musical journey, as it were. Thank you very much. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
My pleasure.
You've been listening to the Ace podcast. For more excellent music, you can scoot over to the Ace Records website, www.acerecords.co.uk, for all the wonderful music you could possibly need.